Thanks for tuning in to the Football Talk Squadron. I'm Dutch, and this is Week 14 of NFL Action episode. We'll go through what happened in Week 14, some things that we're looking ahead in the future following weeks, as well. It's really an updated playoff picture. A lot of teams are becoming more, not so much of a predictive of are they going to make the playoffs. It's more who's in the playoffs, who's sort of the teetering teams on the wild card. We'll go through all of that, but first and foremost, we'll go through past and present. So we'll start present first, and I think this is a guy that has been in the news nonstop since the game happened, but I thought it'd be a great player to start with, Kadarius Toney. Where did Kadarius Toney go to school? Wide receiver for the Chiefs. You know, your big hint is he was given the same level of status of another person that I will mention that came from this same school. A lot of teams thought that he was sort of another version of this guy that came out in the early, 2000s from the Urban Meyer Florida teams. This was a guy that was billed sort of the same way, really didn't work out with the Giants. The Chiefs brought him in. I would say that it wasn't that he disappointed with the Chiefs. He had a lot of injury problems coming from the Giants, but in the Super Bowl is where, everyone thought going into this year that Kadarius Toney was going to have an amazing year, really had some bricks for hands moments, and then, a few inches off sides in the last week's game. Just some big things to happen. If you need a little bit more time to think about where Kadarius Toney went, go ahead and pause, because the answer is it's the University of Florida. And that other player that I was talking about that he was built up to was Percy Harvin. Both guys had tremendous speed. The biggest difference is between Percy and Kadarius. Percy never had the problems on the field in terms of just being able to catch the football. Percy had some off-the-field issues and maybe just some effort issues, but in terms of once you put the ball into Percy's hands, Percy was unstoppable. Him at the, when you take a look at his career at the Vikings, and then especially in that Super Bowl, sort of a Kadarius Toney moment in that Super Bowl for Percy Harvin with a kickoff return, both of them showed up in that game and, really proved to be the difference. Seattle, way more, less of an impact from Harvin just because that defense held Peyton and the Broncos to really nothing that whole game. It was an onslaught from the beginning, from the time that the safety happened until the final bell. Kadarius Toney, on the other hand, really helped propel the Chiefs to win the Super Bowl and beat the Eagles. Now that we've talked about the present, we'll go with the past. For the past player, his school was the University of Notre Dame. Played for the Seahawks, the Lions, the Eagles, the Giants, and then finished up his career on the practice squad with the Titans. So Notre Dame, then Seattle, Detroit, Philly, the Giants, and the Titans. The draft was 2010, second round, 60th overall pick. Did win a Super Bowl with a particular team. I won't tell you who that was. You can figure that out for yourself. And in 2009, was a Biletnikoff Award winner, the best wide receiver in the country in 2009. I'm trying to think of another. He's broken up a marriage. He had a really controversial call, which we'll get to here in a minute. Those are sort of, or at least rumored to broken up a marriage. We'll talk about that here in a second. But those are sort of your two bigger hints. If you need a little bit more time, go ahead and pause, because the answer is it's Golden Tate. Golden Tate, the marriage I'm talking about is the Russell Wilson's first marriage, and the controversial call, which is the whole reason that I'm calling out Kadarius Toney and Golden Tate, was, if you remember back when the NFL had the referee strike and they had replacement refs, Green Bay was playing Seattle. They called it the Fail Mary, threw it up. I think it was pretty obvious that the Packers defender had possession. One of the refs starts waving his hands above his hand or above his head, indicating, hey, this is going to be a touchback. The defensive player has it. The other ref is like seeing his hands start to go up, and instead of signaling, hey, this is a touchback, goes up in the touchdown signal. They go through review, ends up that the touchdown stands, really robbed Green Bay of the game. They had played a really good game up until that point. But from that point forward, the country sort of exploded with outcry over the refs. It really helped get the referees the deal that they have now, and we lost the replacement refs the week after. The reason I bring that up is we can get into a little bit of the offsides. Was it offsides? 100%. Do both sides have an argument in terms of, especially the Chiefs, like talking about the warning? There's been a lot of really, really good discussion on the outside in terms of data. Like I saw a guy talk about it that, throughout this entire NFL season, this is the first time that a wide receiver in not just this season, in Andy Reid's entire head coaching career, it's the very first time that he's ever had a wide receiver called offsides for lining up in the neutral zone, which that stat alone should really sort of, I think, exemplify why Andy Reid was upset. Is that his entire coaching career, and this talk about a warning and everything, and then there's a fan video that came out that shows Tony clearly look over to the ref, tell him, hey, I'm on the line. It's unclear of whether the ref acknowledged or anything, but the fact that there wasn't a lot of signal back to Tony saying, hey, you're outside of the line of scrimmage, you're actually in front of, there's a lot of controversy with that. I'm not going to go into so much of the fallout from that. What I really want to go into is the fact that the refereeing has been a consistent problem this year. And the fact that it's overshadowed really good games and it's made an impact on those games is a problem. That's the main point of emphasis. You have guys that are being paid. An NFL referee makes a little over $200,000 a year. $200,000 a year for 18 weeks of work. That is extraordinarily good money. And then they get paid extra for when, based upon how well they referee, that is how they select playoff referees, and ultimately the Super Bowl officiating crew is based upon the crews that make the fewest missed calls are the ones who get the opportunity to referee those bigger games, and they also get paid more in those bigger games for not missing those big calls. I take a step back and I look at it, and this is sort of a twofold argument. First is the NFL has an issue. And one of the things that's sort of being exemplified, like I follow JJ Watt on Twitter, and one of the things he's really done a really good job with on Twitter is he's been tweeting out all the different fines that have happened each and every week that I would say are beyond, questionable. You have running backs that are lowering their shoulder at the point of, contact, defenders flying in and they are protecting themselves. And the NFL is finding the example from last week was Breece Hall lowers his shoulder in the Jets game as he's getting tackled against Atlanta, and they end up finding Breece Hall almost $50,000 for a play that I think everyone here would say that's just a normal football play. What did you expect the offender to do in that position except just get drilled by the defender without actually protecting himself? The reason I bring this up is that when you take a look at it from this standpoint, when the NFL is fining a player for that type of action, what they are saying is this should have been a flag. It wasn't called a flag. We deem it, an unnecessary or a unsportsmanlike, however you want to, condone the action, an illegal move on the football field, and they're fining the player for it. But it's not drawing the flag. And if you will go back about 5 years in your memory in NFL history, this was a flag. A lot of guys, I think, have forgotten that a few years ago, the NFL really emphasized that lowering the helmet to initiate contact from either the offensive or defensive player resulted in a 15-yard penalty. And what was the outcome of that? Fans lost their minds. Like, they were furious that the fact that, hey, you're changing the outcome of the game because this running back is lowering his head. This is a basic football move. And commentators, fans, even former players, current players, coaches, everyone was losing it. So what did the NFL do? They didn't change the fact that they thought it was a bad move on the football player. They just made it so they didn't throw the flag. They didn't draw attention to it during the game. They're counting on the fact that, hey, a vast majority of fans just watch it on the field. They're not seeing the after effect that, hey, we're fining these players tens of thousands of dollars on a weekly basis for doing such actions, that goes unnoticed by fans, so there's not as much outrage. They're mitigating the outrage, but still, I would say, changing the game of football from an outside perspective, where they're not letting the fans actually really see the impact that's happening because they're not changing the calls during the game. They're finding the players and trying to coerce them into playing different throughout the game, which I think is a huge problem. Like, at the end of the day, the NFL is going to have to decide with the referees, like, how do we want this game to be called? The referees they're just a conduit at the end of the day. They're going to do whatever the NFL tells them to do. Hey, if you want us to call games in this fashion and really emphasize these points, that's what we'll do. And when the fans react, the NFL sort of changes how they want the referees to call the game. You see it every single year. And you sort of see it on a week-by-week basis, that if something is happening that the NFL doesn't like, they really hone in on it. Take a look at the tush-push. Like, at the beginning of the year, there really wasn't a lot of flags. Then they really started honing in on if the offensive player is lined up in the neutral zone, if there's any type of false start movement. They've really been, flagging the offensive team in the tush-push scenarios. And I think it's to try to discourage teams from lining up. If you're going to line up and do it, it better be to perfection according to the NFL standards. The second part of this outcome is I bring up the referee salaries and making $200,000 a year. I know that they're a conduit. At the end of the day, a ref has to be held responsible for the calls that they make. You can't sit back and fine players and have the outcomes of games impacted by really bad calls. Was Tony out offsides? 100%. The week prior, was that pass interference on MVS? 100%. You can't sit back and say, hey, in this moment of the game, we're just not going to make these calls, which I think is what sort of Mahomes and Reed had a lot of. I know they were very vocal about the offsides, but you sit back and you take a look at how NFL crews call flags at the beginning of the game compared to the end. There is a clear difference. It's always been that way. Even to the point of, like, when you talk about a delay of game, they usually give the players a break that, hey, when they hit a second, 0 seconds in the play clock, the referee's watching the clock. Whoever the back judge is that's behind the defense is looking through the offensive, players to the back of the end zone on the other side of the field. When he sees 0, he looks down. If the ball has not been snapped at that point, that's when he throws the flag. So really, there's probably, a half a second to a second after the clock hits 0, that's sort of a grace period. Was it a delay of game? 100%. The ball wasn't snapped. Do they sort of have some, flexibility with that? 100%. When you take a look at NFL officiating right now and how it's going and how it's affecting games, that's where you sit back and you go, there needs to be some type of flexibility that at least if the call is wrong from the NFL office, they need to call down and be like, hey, no, that was pass interference. Like, you have to correct the things on the field. And if you're not going to do that, then just like you do with the NFL players that, hey, you didn't call a flag during the game for him lowering his head, but you're willing to fine this dude half his game check and sometimes his full game check for making that type of play, then you should be willing to do the officials the same way. There has to be some type of communication that the NFL is holding the referees to the same standard that it holds the players, at least from a fan's perspective. That's my take on it. I know that's a long-winded conversation to start off the podcast about refereeing, but I thought it was needed in this day. I mean, I even look at last night's game. We'll get into it here in a second with the Dolphins. If you watch the game, right at the end of the game, the Titans have got the Dolphins in the red zone. The tight end clearly false starts. The defensive line shifts, does not enter the neutral zone, just shifts away from the tight end, goes away from the player, and he moves. And they call the defensive player for an abrupt movement. That blew my mind, and it was something that was like untalked about during the game by the announcers, is the fact that was clearly offsides by the tight end. But the fact that they then changed it to the defensive player because he shifted down the line without ever entering the neutral zone, it goes back to this conversation, what's the hardest position on the field, being a cornerback, because all the rules are against you. It is becoming an offensive game for the NFL. Like, the NFL really hampers any type of defensive effort that you could possibly get. And I think that you're going to start seeing teams get away from really trying to focus on their defense. Like if you are a good football team, it's because your offense can't be stopped, because the rules help you out. You have way too good of players. It pays to put up more than 50 points than it does to hold teams to under a certain score. It pays to have a better offense than a better defense, because that's the rules that the NFL is set up right now. I know for myself, I really like a good defensive game. I'm not saying that I like a 6-3 game. That's sort of boring. I know my dad would sit back and be the opposite. He really loves like just a stalemate of a defensive game. But from an offensive perspective, I think right now it's to the point that it's like the defense can't do anything but be wrong. That's a problem in the NFL. But we'll get to the Dolphins game here in a second. I think the first game that we'll hop right into was the Thursday night football game of Pat's Steelers. You take a look at that game, and I'd be one to tell you I was shocked as anyone that in the first half the Patriots could not be stopped on offense. And it really highlighted to me how bad the Steelers are. Like, we've talked about this a lot in terms of the Steelers' record is not a good reflection of their team. They are above 500 team on paper, but when you watch the Steelers, you sit back and go, dude, this team is a mess, an absolute mess. And it's very surprising that you see a Steelers organization that I would classify as undisciplined. And you see it in terms of their physicality. And that's what I know from an undisciplined standpoint. A lot of people just think, oh, they're getting a lot of flags, they're doing things that are uncommon. It's not just that. That happens with breakdown and coverages, but really from a physicality standpoint, like the Steelers have always sort of been that team when you think about the time during Big Ben and even before Big Ben with the steel curtain. You know, the Steelers impose their will on other teams through running the football and playing hard, nosed defensive football, controlling the line of scrimmage on both sides, linebackers that fly around that aren't afraid to stop the run. You have really good safeties. Minkah Fitzpatrick is definitely fitting that bill for the Steelers. And you think about pass with Troy Polamalu. Like, they've always had those guys that are amazing players on the defense, but when you take a look at the rest of the players around either Fitzpatrick or even on the offensive side of the football, they have a ton of holes. In the fact that they gave up 21 points in the first half to a team that had barely scored 13 in the prior 3 weeks and, scored 0 at home against San Diego, it was not a good look for the Steelers. I think there's going to be a lot of conversations about Mike Tomlin, maybe not being with the team after this season. The Steelers have always been that team. You look at in the past, I think it's, going back to the 60s, they've had 3 coaches. They had Chuck Noll, that was, the founder of all of the Super Bowls that they won back with the Steel Curtain. You got Lambert, Ham, Shell, Bradshaw, Lynn Swann, Stallworth, Franco Harris, you could list, all these Hall of Famers. That was Chuck Noll. Who came after Chuck Noll? Another Hall of Fame head coach, Bill Cowher. Bill Cowher wins the Super Bowl versus the Seahawks, has his moment in the day. Then they go out when Cowher's time's over. They've had Mike Tomlin since. They've had less head coaches in that time than any other team in the NFL. Even the only team that comes close to them is the New England Patriots, and that's because they've had Bill Belichick at the helm since the early 2000s. That's it. The Steelers, and I appreciate it because when you keep consistency at the position of a head coach, it really makes it so that you can build a roster that is pretty consistent. And that's why I say that they're not fitting the bill for the consistency that we've seen out of the Steelers in the past. And it's because they've had the same coach that gets the players that they want, that fit the mold of the Steelers. When they have someone that doesn't fit that mold, aka like Antonio Brown, his last few years, Chase Claypool, when they have guys that are not doing things the Steelers way, what do? They get rid of them. We talked about it last week with Pickens and Deontay Johnson, that, here are 2 guys that are good players for the Steelers, but they're not fitting that mold of they give up on plays. They're not chasing down fumbles, just the lack of consistency and discipline that you see out of those two guys, I sit back and go, they're not going to be Steelers for much longer. That's how that organization operates, and that's why they're consistently good. I mean, at the end of the day, for as bad as the Steelers look on paper, they're still above a 500 team. Mike Tomlin has never had a season below 500. That is remarkable. I mean, Belichick is on a highway right now. He's already done it with having 10 losses this season. The Patriots will not be an above 500 football team this year. That's remarkable that Bill Belichick's having that type of, failures on the football team while Mike Tomlin is still finding ways to get his team above 500. That's all I'm saying in that scenario. For the Patriots, you sit back and you look at them. Zappe plays really well. They have some good catches by Henry. They don't score in the second half. The Steelers had opportunities to come back and win that game, just failed to do so. It's not that New England, I'm not going to sit back. It's funny they mentioned it a few times that, San Diego pretty much has to lose out. The Patriots have to win out, and then maybe the Patriots can be a playoff team. Do I see that happening? No. Like, the Patriots are still a really bad football team. Chargers may actually win out or lose out for the rest of the season with Herbert going down. But from that standpoint of where do these franchises look to, a lot of people are pointing to the Patriots taking a QB. They're going to have a top 5 draft pick this upcoming season. I don't see the Patriots going any other direction than a quarterback outside of trading back. If they're going to take a player, it's going to be a quarterback. They're done with Mac Jones. I don't think Belichick likes Zappe. It depends on, do they keep Belichick? How does that organization go at the end of the season? I think there's going to be a ton of decisions once the Patriots are either out of the playoff contention or at the end of the season once they play their last game. Robert Kraft's going to make changes. Where those changes come from and where they go, we'll see. I think in either scenario, whether it's Belichick or someone new at the helm, they're going to change it up at quarterback. When you have that high of a draft pick, that's what you're going to go do outside of trade back. If Belichick's at the helm, I can see him trading back because that's what Belichick does. I think with a new coach at helm, they're going to take a quarterback. That's just my 2 cents. We'll see where it goes in the offseason. Then we get into the Sunday games. Starting off with the Bucs-Falcons, I think was a great win for Tampa Bay. Like, the issue with Tampa Bay is they've shown such inconsistencies on offense. They have, Godwin and Evans are tremendous weapons. Baker has played better than I think either me or Maul, or I think most people around the country really thought Baker would play. You remember the Browns days. I think people forget that he had a really sort of above average end of the season last year once he went to the Rams and showed some really good promise with them. And then he gets to Tampa Bay and surrounded with the talent that he has. I think the Bucs are still in the driver's seat. I know we've talked about all year. It sort of flipped around between them, the Falcons, and the Saints. All three are still in contention. The Bucs sort of own the ability in terms of talent on their roster, especially on the offensive side of the football, to win the division. Like the Saints with Derek Carr just struggle to be, I would argue, above a 500 football team. Yes, they beat the Panthers. That's not anything to write home about. But from the standpoint of when you see Carr play against better football teams, they struggle and struggle mightily. The Falcons, at the end of the day, Arthur Smith does not have the ability to get his players into the correct position to win games when necessary. Like the Falcons, from an organizational standpoint, have a ton of problems in the management of their football team. That's the Falcons' problem, and it begins at their head coach. They have really good players on the offensive side of the football. They need a quarterback. They really need a quarterback. We've talked about it for a while, and I'll get into it in our next game, but where they go with that quarterback position, whether it be via the draft or in the offseason, I think it's going to be the offseason. When you take a look at the Falcons' record, we talked about last week, they're 19th overall in the draft last week. They're probably going to be in the mid-teens is what I would say for the Falcons, unless they go on a winning tear here to win the season. Then they maybe in the lower 20s. I don't see a quarterback being there in the late first round that they're going to be enamored with. Their best bet is going into the offseason, either trading for a quarterback of one of the top teams or picking up someone that, a top team has discarded to say, who is this guy going to be, or just getting another veteran. Like, it's clear that, I mean, here Joe Flacco comes in for the Browns and has looked pretty good. Like, he's winning football games. Like, I would argue that is pretty good from that standpoint for a guy that didn't play football all this year. Those are the type of things that the Falcons are going to have to look into, is where do they go from the offensive side of the football to be able to, distribute the football around. Ritter's not the answer. Heineke's hurt. I would argue Heineke isn't the guy that they want to entrust the franchise with next year. They're going to go find someone else. It's just a matter of who that is. The Buccaneers, you sit back and look at them. Where is their biggest question? It's protecting Mayfield. Like, if there's been any inconsistency with the Buccaneers this year and the reason they've lost games, it's been on the defensive side of the football for giving up super late drives. Look back at Josh Dobbs when they played the Vikings, comes in and leads them right down the field and scores with under a minute to go in the game. You can't do that from the defensive side of the football. And then from the offensive side of the football, it's really not Baker's play, it's the offensive line. Like, that offensive line has been ravaged, and we saw it last year with Tom Brady, is that the reason Tom Brady had a bad year is because he didn't have an offensive line blocking for him. Like, it is very difficult to have success in the NFL without an offensive line. Look at Bryce Young and the Panthers. Like, I literally watched him take a snap, and he literally got sacked by every single defensive lineman on the same play. It's like all of them got free and sacked him at the same time. It was just one of those ones that you sit back and you go, there's nothing that he could have done to make that play playable. Just nothing that could have happened. So from the Buccaneers, they have a better offensive line. When they play well, the Buccaneers win. When the Bucs line is struggling against a good defensive front, they lose. Like, they are live or die based upon their production of the offensive line. But from that perspective, you sit back and you look at the Buccaneers and sort of where they're at, both of those franchises, their offensive lines. Then you go to the next game line, Bears. Both me and Maul both called the Bears to win. It happened. Why did we think that? We talked about sort of the trajectory of teams. Like, you take a look at, who's building throughout the year, who's having better and better games as they go on. The Ravens come to mind. A few other teams, the Texans have had a good week, except for this week. We'll talk about that here in a second. The Lions, on the other hand, ever since they got blown out by the Ravens, I think that people have really started to put a lot of doubt into the Lions. And this week is no exception. They struggled with Fields 2 weeks ago. It should have lost the game. They had, Goff drive down and score in the final minute in order to be able to get a good win. But from that standpoint, you look at the past few weeks, and the Lions have really struggled stopping football teams. Like, really struggled. Their defensive secondary is rough. It's on the void of being trash. Like, they have I would almost argue, an impossible job of stopping teams. They really cannot get guys stopped. I mean, Fields hits DJ Moore wide open for that 40-yard touchdown pass. I mean, there's just plays that you see the Lions make that at the end of the day, you go, they're not winning a Super Bowl with that defense. Like, that, for me, that's sort of where the Lions were going into this year, especially after they beat the Chiefs, is you sit back and you go, hey, where's the Lions' goals this year? It's not just to get into the playoffs, it's to go to a Super Bowl. I don't see that happening. And then the other part of this is Goff really struggles when they put the ball into his hands without play action. Like, when it's so surprising too. Like, you look at all the weapons that they have with Reynolds, Amon-Ra, Jameson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Montgomery, Sam Laporta. Like, they have talent on the offensive side of the football, but they cannot get it dispersed out of the shotgun when behind. Like, the Lions are not the team that wins when they are behind. They cannot get it together, and that is so surprising this year. And it really reminds me of Goff's last year with the Rams. Like, they had a ton of talent on that team. When you think about that Super Bowl year that they lost to the Patriots 13-3, and could not get any type of offensive production, it was because Belichick drew up a great game plan. And I think teams have really gone back to how they've, stopped Goff at that point and brought that back, and it's clear that it's working. Like, The Lions cannot be successful unless they're running the football. When you have Goff have to drop back and make throws, it's not working for the Lions. And the problem is I don't see it getting better for the Lions. Like, they have to play some good football teams going forward. They have to play the Vikings twice, which now, after they lost to the Bears, is for the division. Like, whoever wins these two Vikings games going forward is going to be the divisional champ. Like, is it going to be the Lions or is it going to be the Vikings? We'll find out. The Lions got a little bit of help last night with the Giants beating the Packers in terms of the divisional race and keeping the Packers a little bit farther down. But it's no longer the Lions division. And the Lions are going to be that team that will probably get smoked the first week of the playoffs just based upon how they're playing right now. They're not playing good football from that standpoint. The Bears, on the other hand, you sit back and you think of them, and I sort of mentioned it with the Falcons of picking up a quarterback. I've talked a lot of, if the Falcons were to go out and trade for someone, it should be Fields. I think week in, week out, Fields is proving that he deserves another year with Chicago. And I thought about this the other day, that if you looked around the NFL and you said who would you take over Fields? There's a lot of guys. Like, I'd take him over Mayfield. I'd take him over Derek Carr. I'd probably take him over. Bryce Young's a little bit different just because that offense, I don't think even Fields would do well in Carolina based upon how bad that line is. That's a no-win situation. Would I take Fields over Daniel Jones? Absolutely. Like, would I take Fields over Zach Wilson? 100%. Over Mac Jones or Ben Zappi? 100%. And you could go through a lot of different teams around the NFL and say, yeah, I would take Fields over them. Mainly because I still feel like Fields is a little bit unproven. He shows some really good signs. Like, and he still has the athleticism with the legs to keep plays alive and make plays happen. Fields, I think, is still, the book is still out on him. Now, in terms of being an elite quarterback in the NFL, do I think that Fields reaches that level? No. Do I think that Fields can still be better than any other quarterback the Bears have had? 100%. Like, let's get that out of the way. I think for the Bears, you sit back, they're going to have the number one overall pick. What do they do with it? Who knows? I hope it's not draft a quarterback right now with the Bears. Like, what I would rather see the Bears do, and I sort of talked about with the referees of it becoming an offensive league, give Fields as much help as humanly possible. Surround him with wide receivers, get him better offensive linemen, maybe go out and get another tight end, running back. When you put the things around Fields for him to be successful, if Fields isn't successful, then you can go get another quarterback to fill that void, but still be surrounded with talent. What you can't do is you can't go get another quarterback and say, hey, take this team that doesn't have a lot of talent and just make it instantly better. There's very, very, very few quarterbacks that can come out and do that. And honestly, there's only a few guys, I would say not just like once every few years, but like once a decade maybe, that come out of college and instantly make a team better. Those guys are very, very rare. And even those guys, you think about Manning, you think about Brady, a lot of guys that have come out, especially in the first, when I think of, hey, who comes out immediately in the draft, think of Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning, his rookie year, led the league in interceptions. Like, the Colts were a really bad football team, but they were bad when he showed up. Like, they were missing a lot. They put guys around Manning to make him successful. Manning didn't have a great first year. It's hard for a rookie quarterback to come in and just instantly be successful, especially with a roster that the Bears have. They have some good players, but it's not set up for a guy to just walk in and be immediately successful, which is why I sit back and say, build up the team around Fields, and then you sort of get to say, who do we have in Fields? When he has an offensive line and he has all this talent, who do we have at quarterback? If he's not the answer, then go out and get someone else, but don't keep swapping quarterback after quarterback while not improving the team around him. That's what I'll say about the Bears. The next game, you get the Colts and Bengals, and I'll tell you right now, Jake Browning is a huge success for the Bengals. For as much problems as the Bengals have had offensively, Browning I would argue in 2 games has sort of played better than Joe Burrow. And that is not me trying to create any type of drama and say, oh, maybe the Bengals should be thinking about a quarterback change or something like that. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I am saying is for a backup that came into a team that has had problems with offensive productivity, he has played extraordinarily well. And he's won games. They beat the Jacksonville Jaguars last week, beat the Colts, who I would argue the Colts have looked like a really good football team. Those are 2 really good wins for the Bengals. And what's scary is they are in the hunt for a wild card slot. Like, the Bengals still have a chance to backdoor their way into the playoffs. That is crazy for how the season's gone. Then you lose Joe Burrow. The fact that they're even competitive really speaks to the level of offensive play that they've had. They have really good receivers. Like, this is sort of the argument that I build for Fields. It proves it with the Bengals that, when you are a backup quarterback and you're able to step in and you have Jamar Chase, you have T. Higgins, you have Tyler Boyd, you have guys, you have Joe Mixon in the backfield. When you have a team that is built up for success, it really helps you as a young player in the league. It helps you be successful when the guys around you are successes. For the Bengals, the sad part about this season is they're going to lose some of these guys going into the offseason. Like, they give Joe Burrow his big contract. Jamar Chase is going to get a big contract. But those other 2 wide receivers with Higgins and Boyd, they're going to go somewhere else. Like, that the writing is already on the wall. They can't afford to keep all those guys and make the defense better and make the offensive line better. They're going to rely on the draft. I think that with Joe Burrow, that's sort of a good thing. Like, it's good to have your number 1 guy in Chase, but to be able to go in and find good young talent. Like, if the Bengals can find wide receivers late, they're going to be successful. And if you sit back and say, well, that's not really possible, look at the Rams. Like, they do it every year. I mean, think about the steal that they had with Puka Nacua. Like, here's a guy that any team he'd start for right now, the guys are out there. It's just a matter of having a good wide receiver scout and having a good organization that's able to find these guys to pair them up on the right team. I think the Bengals can do it. That's really their off-season goal is to find a wide receiver in the draft. Find someone to come in and pair with Chase, some other offensive line help to help Burrow stay upright. Those are their 2 big goals going into the offseason. Do I think that they can make the playoffs? Yeah, it's possible. I think they can easily go and beat the Steelers and beat the Browns. It's a matter of, can they get it done? You still have a backup. A few weeks ago, we were sitting here talking about how good Josh Dobbs had looked, and now he's really struggling. The time is going to come where teams are going to start showing Browning more stuff. Can he overcome that? We'll find out in the following few weeks. For the Colts, on the other hand, you sit back and look at them, not having Taylor hurt them in that game. The other big thing that I really think happened, I bring it back to Purdy when he got sort of concussed during a game and then didn't play right, didn't look right for those few weeks. They go into the bye, he comes out, he looks like the same Purdy that we saw at the beginning of the year. Minshew took a shot, and it's clear when he got up, my man was concussed. Like, he wasn't walking right. The fact that he still played in that game, I'm sorry to tell you, but a quarterback who's not like thinking just completely straight on is going to make mistakes and not play as well as he has in previous weeks. It going out on a golf course, if you're sitting there trying to hit, a ball with a tiny piece of metal straight every single time, and then you throw in, hey, now I have a concussion, I can't really focus like I need to, you're not going to play well. Like, that's the same thing with the quarterback position. For the Colts, they have a great chance in their division. Like, especially now that the Jaguars, they're showing a lot of problems. The Texans, we'll get to them in a second. The Texans are more through injuries, and we'll get to that. The Colts have a good chance of that division. They're going to have to beat Jacksonville and, win out throughout the rest of the year, but the Colts can easily either get to the playoffs via the division or through the wild card. It's still a possibility for them. We talk about the Jags of how they're looking, for a team that has as much offensive weapons as they have not looked good. Losing Christian Kirk hurts them. That became very evident during this game. I sit back and from the defensive standpoint, they have good players. Like, Allen's good, Walker's good. They have talent on the defensive side of the football. The issue is they're unable to cohesively play as a unit. And what I mean by that is like you have good defensive line, but no matter how good your defensive linemen are, if your corners and your secondary really have problems, it doesn't matter. Like they're just going to get the ball out sooner. The fact that Flacco was torching that secondary says a lot about Jacksonville's secondary. Like I'm not going to put so much on Trevor Lawrence in the offense. I think Cleveland has a really, really good defense. The fact that Jacksonville is unable to stop a quarterback who hasn't played, in almost a whole year, that says more to me about the game than anything else. Jacksonville has problems on the defensive side of the football. It's shown up time and time again this year. It showed up last week against a backup quarterback in Browning. I think a lot of teams, yes, Lawrence got hurt, but when he got hurt, it wasn't like the Jaguars were blowing the Bengals out of the water as they should have been. It was a close game. Like they could not slow down the Bengals offense in the second half. Same thing they couldn't do with the Browns. Like they have a lot of problems on the defensive side of the football. They're not going to be able to get that fixed this year. Are they in sort of the driver's seat for the AFC South? 100%. But in terms of them being a threat in the playoffs in the AFC, maybe, just because teams are on the struggle bus. I mean, the only team out of the AFC that looks like the real deal right now is the Ravens. Like, and I know people are going to sit back and be like, well, it took a punt return in overtime to beat the Rams. The Rams are a good football team. Rams are a really good football team this year. When Matt Stafford's healthy, the Rams are a playoff team without a doubt. You sit back and look at just the inconsistencies through the rest of the AFC, they have a chance to at least win a playoff game in there. They're going to have to still beat a good team, be it be the Chiefs or the Ravens or someone else. The Dolphins, I don't even want to say the Dolphins after last night, but from the standpoint of they have the ability to come out and make an impact, 100%. But we'll find out. Saints-Panthers is the next game up. I sit back and look at this game, and it's one that I don't even want to talk about. Like the Panthers, from the standpoint of what they have done to Bryce Young, is it's criminal. Like that offensive line is terrible. It's the worst in the entire NFL. Like I literally watched him get all 4 defensive linemen on him after the snap. It's trying to get rid of it. They cause a fumble, get on it. Like he can't win under that system. The Panthers are a terrible football team, and they have so many holes. It's next year's draft isn't going to help them, especially now that they don't have a first overall pick. Like the Panthers are in a lot of trouble going forward. They need a new coach. We'll see where they go. They have an owner who has shown a lot of signs as being an owner that you probably don't want as an owner. When you're trying to run a football team as a head coach, they have problems. The Saints, they get the victory, but from the standpoint of the Saints, you sitting back and looking at them and going, hey, this is a playoff team that I don't want to play. No one's saying that. I think a lot of teams would love to play the Saints going into the season because the Saints have not looked good. They have not played consistently all year long. Any transition from the Saints to, two other teams that sort of mirror this. Like you got the Texans that I think are better than the Saints, and then you have the Jets, which I would say have performed like the Panthers. But the difference is I don't know whose mom was in the stands, but man, Zach Wilson balled out. Like they need to recruit whoever he saw in the stands to come back next week because he played, I think, like the Jets had always hoped he had played when they drafted him out of BYU. Like he had a really, really good football game, really threw the football well, dispersed the football. They played very well against the Texans. Why? A lot of people, I go back to sort of the preseason. The Jets, in my opinion, have one of, if not the best, outside of San Francisco, defense in the NFL. I think that if you put a better quarterback in the lineup, if Rodgers never gets hurt and they had a good offense, if they had the same offense that the 49ers had, then the Jets have the best defense in the NFL, bar none. Like, I think that with a better offense that keeps them off the field less, the Jets have the defense. They have a Super Bowl caliber defense. The Jets can win games based upon their defense. They need the offense to be there. They showed up. It did not help the Texans that last week you lose Tank Dell. Like, Tank Dell was a huge part of that offense. tremendous speed, really kept the safeties in check because he could take the top off the defense. It made it so the Texans could run the ball with Dameon Pierce just because guys had to be aware of where Tank Dell was on the field. It made the defense play differently. And then you lose Nico Collins during the game as well. The Texans losing those wide receivers, they just don't have, I would argue, no team really does, the offensive depth to lose your top two receivers from a team and still play consistently in the NFL. You just don't have guys that are sitting in that, fourth and fifth on the depth chart that are really those game changers that are going to come in and make a team play you the same as if you had your ones and twos out there. Just doesn't happen. The Jets have that type of defense that showed that against the Texans, that, hey, when you bring in subpar talent compared to what you have, we're really going to make you look bad. And that's what the Jets did. I sit back and look at the Texans, and I would say that this season going forward is going to be very difficult for the Texans. Not because their offense is going to struggle. I don't think they're going to play any type of defense close to the Jets for the rest of the season. I just look at it from the standpoint of, without Nico Collins, without Tank Dell, depending on how long Nico's gone, I haven't seen anything yet about what his time frame is, but we know Tank's gone for the rest of the year. It's going to be difficult to find the same level of offensive production that you had before. Can the Texans still win football games? 100%. But from an offensive perspective, they need a lot of help. The Jets are in the same position. Like, they have a great defense. A lot of people would sit back, and if the Jets can be in a position that maybe they could get into the playoffs, who knows? Like, can Aaron Rodgers defy all, sense of logic and come back and play this year after an Achilles tear and still make the Jets a playoff team? Who knows? If that happens, it'll be a wild story. The Jets have a lot of problems. Like, it's not something that's going to be fixed this season. Their offensive line is still rough. They still need help on the offensive side of the football. Garrett Wilson is a great wide receiver. Conklin, I would argue, is a good tight end. Breece Hall's a good running back. So is Dalvin Cook, but they don't have a ton of talent on that offensive side of the football. It's why they try to trade for Devontae Adams at the trade deadline. I think they're going to go after him hard in the offseason. The Jets are going to have a good first-round pick. They're going to go out and get talent. Like, the Jets are going to load up in the offseason, and they're going to make a Super Bowl run next year as long as they can keep Rodgers healthy. If that happens, watch out. Like, the Jets are the team that I don't think anyone wants to play next year. That's my personal take on the Jets. How it goes for the rest of the season, who knows? It really is going to depend. Can the Jets keep winning and keep themselves into a position to get in the playoffs if Aaron Rodgers truly can come back? If that can happen, then anything's on the table. For the game of the week, in my opinion, outside of the Monday night games, it was the Rams-Ravens. Like, it was a tremendous game. And the reason I bring it up is, like, I think a lot of people looked at, and myself included, that the Rams were going to have a rough year just because they had lost so much with trade capital of trading for all those guys to build that Super Bowl roster. You really thought it was going to be time for them to sort of pay their dues with making those trades of not being able to go out and get really good guys. But then they find guys like Puka Nacua. Like, they find a guy in the fourth round that you sit back and go, dude, like, this dude's a stud, and you pair him with Cooper Kupp, and you have a healthy Matt Stafford, and they still have the best player in the NFL right now on defense in Aaron Donald. And I get that I am putting him above Michael Parsons, but Aaron Donald is the best defensive tackle to have ever played the game in the NFL. There is not a better NFL defensive tackle. Now, we can talk about defensive players, but from an interior defensive lineman, I don't know anyone that's played better than Aaron Donald has. Like, he has beaten Mean Joe Green. I sit back, you think of Richard Seymour, you think of a lot of different guys that have played that interior position, Vince Wilfork, other guys. There's no one that compares. He blows J.J. Watt out of the water. And I don't mean that lightly. Like, J.J. Watt is a Hall of Fame player, but Aaron Donald, I watched him during that game. They had 3 offensive linemen blocking him, and they still struggled against Aaron Donald. 3 NFL offensive linemen. The best guys in the world at playing offensive line are in the NFL, and they're having a problem blocking one dude. Like, that's how good he is. He is literally that type of game changer on the defensive side of the football. As long as they have him and a healthy Matt Stafford with Sean McVay, the Rams are a serious threat. They are a good football team. They're a good football team. It'll be interesting to see, if you put the Rams against the Lions, Rams are going to win that game. If you put the Rams against the Eagles, I think the Rams win that game. Like, their biggest opponent in the NFC is the Cowboys and the 49ers. I would argue that I think they have a better chance of beating the 49ers than they do the Cowboys because it's the divisional opponent. The divisional opponents, it just sort of equalizes talent. It really comes down to coaching. They know one another. They've played against one another so much that every single time that they play, it's usually a close game. The reason I sort of give them an edge over the 49ers than Dallas is because of that. It's not because I think Dallas is a better football team than the Niners. I don't. I think the Niners are the best team, not just in the NFC, but in all of pro football right now. The Niners are on a path to go to the Super Bowl. Who stops them? I don't think anyone at this standpoint. But we'll see. And I mean, we'll go right into the Niners-Seahawks game. Not having Geno hurt, you have Locke, it shows, but the 49ers are a good football team, like throughout. Find their weakness. It's tough. Like on the defensive line, you got Bosa and Young, linebacker Fred Warner. Maybe their secondary, but the problem is with their secondary is when you get a good defensive pass rush, it makes your secondary look good. And then on the offensive side, you have a Hall of Famer in Trent Williams. You have Christian McCaffrey, the best running back in all the NFL. And then you got Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk. And you have Mr. Irrelevant playing at an MVP caliber level of football right now. Like, not just MVP for his team, but MVP for the NFL. Like, he's playing extraordinarily well. The 49ers are the team to beat. And when they play as they have against... You take a look at the teams in the NFC that they beat. They manhandled the Cowboys, manhandled the Eagles. It's going to be tough to beat this football team. When healthy, the 49ers are the Super Bowl, I think, clear favorite right now in all the NFL. The Seahawks, on the other hand, are a team that has consistently gotten worse from last year. They are in the same boat as the Lions. Like you look at the Seahawks team and you go, hey, I think it's a playoff team, but it's not one that I would put any money on to win a game. Like they have struggled with the amount of weapons. They are so eerily similar to the Lions. It's scary when you think about all the talent that the Lions have on the offensive side of the football, and you compare that to Seattle. The fact that they struggled so much, it really comes down to the quarterback play. Geno Smith hasn't played as well as he has last year. Same with Jared Goff. Like, you're not seeing the level of play out of quarterback that you want to see of those two teams, and it shows on the field. I get that they're playing the 49ers and that you're going to see some type of degrade from the offensive perspective, but from the side of, hey, you look at the times they haven't played the Niners, they still struggle mightily on the offensive side of the football. And when you have Metcalf, you have Lockett, you have Njigba, like you have Walker when healthy, that team should be really good, and they're not. They're just not a good football team right now. They're not looking like a team that is going to pose a threat to someone in the playoffs. They're more of a team that you can see, losing pretty quickly in the playoffs. That's how you see that. Before we get into the rest of the games, the worst game of the week, in my opinion, was the Vikings-Raiders. Like, anytime it's 3-0, it would be something else if we're talking about the 85 Bears playing the legendary Steel Curtain defense. Like, that type of defensive game. That's not what this was. This was just an incredibly sloppy game that someone just happened to find a way to win. Like, there's not a good way to put a bow on this game outside of, hey, at least we didn't have to watch it, and that the Bills-Chiefs game was shown over, many Raiders. Sorry for the people that live in Nevada or Minnesota that you had to get stuck with watching that game, or somewhere on the West Coast, because the Chiefs-Bills game was amazing, but you got stuck watching that terrible game. It was a terrible football game. There's no way to sugarcoat that. There's a lot of questions about Josh Dobbs. Is he the guy going forward? They have Nick Mullins, which a lot of people, if I sit back and tell you, hey, this is the guy that before Jimmy G with the Niners, Kyle Shanahan had Nick Mullins and was shown. he was sort of like a Taylor Heineke, like had some really, really good moments, had some bad moments. He's not your standard NFL starter. He got the opportunity to. He's more in that backup role. They're talking about moving him in place of Dobbs. Dobbs has really struggled the past few weeks. They get Justin Jefferson back, and then he throws that pass that gets him just absolutely murdered over the middle of the field. There hasn't been a lot of reports of where Justin Jefferson's going in terms of, is he going to be back this week? What type of injury did he have? I haven't seen anything yet. The Vikings need Jefferson to be back, and they need consistent play to beat the Lions. Like if the Vikings want to get in the playoffs, then they need to win the 2 games against the Lions. That's how the Vikings punch their ticket. If they can't find a way to get that done, they don't deserve to be in the playoffs. But that's it. The Raiders, it's a complete rebuild for the Raiders. Like, I think that they will trade Devontae Adams. I think they let go of Hunter Renfrow. I think they make some major changes on the defensive and offensive side. The only guy that I really see them keeping is Max Crosby. Outside of that, it's going to be a complete rebuild. I mean, you think, I forget what the guy's name is that they drafted out of Texas Tech. And the reason I forget him, I think it was the 7th overall pick the Raiders spent on the defensive end out of Texas Tech. And my man has been a complete no-show. Like, when you take a look at the Raiders draft going back, really their only success was Josh Jacobs. Outside of him, you think of Abrams, you think of the guy that they took out of Clemson, like 4th overall, the defensive end, Clinton Farrell. I mean, they have had tremendous swings and misses in drafts, and it's shown up again this year, like with their first round selection. Like, here's a guy that has not made any type of impact, so much so I don't even know what his name is. I think it was like Tate Wilson or something. Just somebody that you sit back and you go, yeah, complete swing and a miss. The Raiders have to find out how to draft some guys to get success there, but it's going to be a complete rebuild for the Raiders going forward. Then we get to the game of the week, in my opinion, Bills-Chiefs. The Bills found a way yet again to beat the Chiefs in the regular season. My biggest question for the Bills is, can you do it in the playoffs? I think that at the beginning of the year, I predicted that the Bills would beat the Chiefs in the playoffs. I think that this is the year that can happen. The Chiefs struggle so much because they do not have any wide receivers. And when they do have wide receivers, they line up offsides. Like, it is a Mahomes-Kelsey show, and when someone is able to contribute, they have some impact, but those times that they cannot get their wide receivers to do anything, to include just merely catch the football, they are not a good football team. Like, they are struggling offensively, which is so surprising for the Chiefs. And it really goes back to the fact that they do not have a wide receiver. Like, it cannot be understated that the Chiefs, if they had kept even Juju or Sammy, or went out and traded for Mike Evans, or just got somebody else, it would be a different football team. But they're not, because they don't have a wide receiver. The Bills, on the other hand, I want to sit back and reward the Bills for playing and beating the Chiefs, and it is a reward. They still have a lot of problems. You can't watch that game and not look at their defense and be like, you almost blew the game again. You keep doing this against the Chiefs, and you keep doing it in the playoffs, that the Bills defense has not shown up. They've had some tremendous injuries in the position of corner and middle linebacker that has shown up consistently throughout the year. On the offensive side of the football, the inability to run the football has been the Bills' Achilles heel since the Chiefs game, like back in the AFC Championship a few years ago. We knew this leaving that game, but they have still yet to find a guy to run the football. I sit back and look at the Bills. The thing that makes sense for the Bills is go out and get Saquon Barkley. Like, go out and get that guy. Like, that would be a guy that changed your team. The issue for the Bills is, I don't think a lot of people know this, the Bills going into next year are $39 million in the hole in the cap. The Bills paid a ton of money on the defensive side of the football to Von Miller and Ed Oliver, both of which, ever since they have paid them, now Von through injuries, Ed just really performance, has not lived up to the bill. Then on the offensive side of the football, you pay Josh Allen. That's a no-brainer. You have Stephon Diggs that's getting a lot of money. You got Gabe Davis. They have a lot of issues they have to fix in the offseason, and it's going to be trading a lot of players away. I think that they're going to get rid of Ed Oliver. They're going to get rid of Von Miller. They're going to need to do a complete overhaul in the defense, and then they're going to have to sit back and try to figure out offensive weapons. And then on top of all that, you sort of need to figure out the head coach. Like the Sean McDermott news about what he said about 9/11, for those of you who don't know, according to the reports, back in 2019, McDermott was trying to get his team around the idea of you got to communicate as a team. And his example that he used was the hijackers on 9/11. Of all the different references that you could have used about good team communication, this was the last option that you should have used. I mean, honestly, you should have talked about Nazi Germany before you referenced, the people that struck the Twin Towers. Like, it is on that level of incompetence that would be brought up. He's apologized for it. I don't think it's so much about the comment. Like, the comment's getting overblown. I think it's more about who leaked the comment. And the reason I bring this up is, think about this. This happened in 2019. Why is this now just getting out? This is a player that has talked about this because they're trying to get him out of the picture. Like, that's my hot take on it. It has really not a lot to do with the comment. The comment is horrific. I'm not going to argue that in the least. The difference is why is it now just coming out? We're talking almost 4 years later, this comment's coming out. It's because a player is sick and tired of the organizational structure, and they're wanting to make changes without actually coming out and saying, hey, we need to fire our head coach. They just tell a terrible story about him that's true to try to force people's hands. I think in the offseason, the Bills are going to part ways with their head coach as well. They need a lot of help on both sides of the football. There are millions of dollars in the hole. It's going to be a rebuild. Who better to do a rebuild than a different head coach? That's where I see the Bills going in the offseason. We'll find out where they do in the playoffs. They're still sitting on the edge of having a wild card slot. The good news for the Bills is their division's terrible. Patriots are terrible. Jets are terrible. Dolphins, as they showed last night, not a good football team. Like, the Dolphins have a good record, not a good football team. The Bills still control their own destiny. They've already beat Miami once. They'll get to play them again. Can they beat them again? There's a lot of questions about where can the Bills go. Do I think they're a Super Bowl team? No. Like, I don't see them beating the Ravens. I don't see them beating the Niners or beating the Eagles. Like, they had the Eagles on the ropes, but in terms of them, like, comparing in a moment where it's like known, hey, it's either to win a Super Bowl or to get to the Super Bowl via AFC Championship against the Ravens, I don't think the Bills are capable of doing that. Do I think they can do it against the Chiefs? Yes, because of the Chiefs' offensive problems. I just don't know how the Bills are going to be able to reach the goal of winning a Super Bowl. That's the thing for the Bills. Then you got Broncos-Chargers. Like, I sit back and the fact they haven't fired Staley, I don't know. It's Pop said it best, the buddy that we've talked about, he's going to come on the podcast next year, that this is just a money grab for Dean Spanos, the owner of the Chargers. Like, it's not about producing a good football team for the fans that's capable of winning a Super Bowl. The head coach should have been fired last year after they had the breakdown against the Jacksonville Jaguars in the playoffs. You're ruining Herbert. Like, he's going to have surgery. Who knows how long he's going to be out on his finger. But you have taken an elite quarterback and made them play at a level that's criminal for the talent that you have, not just on the offensive side of the football with Herbert, but even on the defensive side of the football with Bosa and Khalil Mack and Derwin James. Like, you have talent. The Chargers should be a playoff team, but they're sub 500, like, in not winning games. It is criminal. It's criminal how bad the Chargers have played this year for how much talent they have, and that falls on the head coach. Staley would be the first candidate that I would say should be fired at the end of the season. And then for the Broncos, here's a team that last week couldn't get the victory when they really should have, and then this week really come out and lay it on the Chargers. The Broncos are the team that I don't think anyone wants to play going into the playoffs. They're still a team that I think isn't capable of winning the AFC. I think they'd have too many struggles against the Ravens, but they're not a team that the Chiefs want to play. They're not a team that the Dolphins want to play. They're not a team that either the Bills or maybe the Jets, you can give some other teams out there from the AFC, whether it be the Browns or the Steelers or someone else. Like, there's only the Ravens, and maybe that's probably it that I would say I would put my house on it that the Ravens are going to beat the Broncos in the playoffs. All those other teams, like the Broncos, have shown a great amount of progression throughout the year. They're not a team that anyone wants to play in the playoffs. If they keep winning, they're going to be in the playoffs. Simple as that. They need some help, but they're not a team that you want to play. The Broncos have really looked better. They've really stretching the field with Sutton and Judy. They've had some great success, and they're blocking better for Wilson. That's also the bigger thing. Like, they've played well from that standpoint. They're not a team that anyone wants to play. Then the Sunday night game, which I think everyone sort of thought would be the game of the week, and it turned out to not be the game of the week because the Cowboys murdered the Eagles. The Eagles have a ton of problems, like on the offensive side of the football. It is throughout the game, the thing that I notice is it's sort of like the Bengals. At the beginning of the year, that's sort of where I put the Eagles, is that the Bengals at the beginning of the year really had a problem stretching the defense downfield through deep shots, and they were not hitting those. And when the Bengals hit those deep throws, that's when the Bengals really, they're a completely different football team when they're able to connect downfield. Same as the Eagles. The Eagles have the talent. They have Devontae. They have A.J. Brown. They have those guys, and you saw them take a lot of shots downfield, but more times than not, they were just incomplete. And then the issue was that, they were taking those shots on 1st and 10 or 2nd and 10, and then it left them in long positions, and it just let the Cowboys bring the house and rush Hurts, who I don't think is 100% this year. He's not the runner that he was last year. And I don't think that's because he's like a steps off his game through age or anything like that. I think he's just not 100% healthy this year. And they've got to get that figured out. Their offensive line hasn't played well. At the end of the day, a Hall of Famer in their right tackle in Johnson got manhandled a bunch by Micah Parsons. Now, Micah Parsons is playing, and outside of Aaron Donald, is probably the best defensive player in the NFL right now in Micah Parsons. He's playing unreal. They had no answer for him during that game. And then on the opposite side of the football, the Eagles secondary has struggled. Why has it struggled? Because it's the same secondary from last year. The difference is that defensive line cannot get pressure, which me and Maul both sat down at the beginning of the year and said, this is on paper the best defense, in the NFL when you look at their defensive line, and guys are not getting home. This was the thing that we talked about Jalen Carter in the offseason and what's funny is that at the beginning of the year, Jalen Carter was winning those battles that when he got matched up mano-a-mano, guys couldn't block him. And the Eagles were looking just as dominant in the beginning of the year as they had last year. But now guys are getting these one-on-one opportunities and they're not showing up. They're not having the success that they had last year. Last year they had, I think it was 5 or 6 different guys with 10 plus sacks each. They set a record last year for sacks in the season. They're not anywhere close to that. They couldn't even get to Dak Prescott. And then it highlighted the fact that their secondary isn't as good as people thought it was last year because they're not getting home. They're giving the quarterbacks time to throw the football and they're tearing them up. That's not a problem that you're going to solve until the defensive line gets home. If you're playing the Eagles and your offensive line can block their defensive line, you're going to win the football game. Because the Eagles secondary sucks. That's the end all be all to how to beat the Eagles. You just got to get their defensive line under control, which is not as difficult as it was last year. Plain and simple. For the Cowboys, it's your division. It's your division. Now, they are going to eventually have to play the 49ers. I would argue that their biggest battle is not with the Eagles going forward. The Eagles have shown via the past 2 weeks against the Cowboys. And really, let's change that. The past 3 weeks. They got blown out by the Cowboys and the Niners, and then the week prior, they really struggled with the Bills. Should have lost that game. You look at the Eagles right now, and for being the best record in football just a few weeks ago, I think a lot of people would have said, hey, they're not that team. It's really showed up. really, really showed up that they're not that team. They have to get it turned around going into the postseason, or they're going to struggle. The thing about the Cowboys is I did see this tweet, and it's right back in the same position that it's been every single year. Is right now we are in the position of this is the Cowboys' year. I heard Maul say it last week. He thinks, hey, this may be the Cowboys' year. And what does this circle involve is we choke in the playoffs. Now, why do I think that has a good possibility of happening again this year? It's all about when teams get hot and can they stay hot. The Cowboys offensively are on fire right now. They are the hottest team even above the 49ers right now in terms of offensive production. There's no team playing better on the offensive side of the football than the Cowboys right now. The issue for the Cowboys is can they make that happen when they get in the playoffs? Like, can you keep this level of play through the next, almost 4 weeks of play and then have a week off with a bye if you end up winning the division? Or get the number 1 seed. That's the only way you get that week off. And then keep up the same level of production. That's going to be tough for the Cowboys. And it's been their motto for the past almost 3 decades that they get into these positions that they should be really good and that they give their fans hope, and then they lose in the playoffs because they can't keep the level of production up. How does that go going forward? From a betting perspective, it's that the Cowboys are going to choke in the playoffs. That's what they've done. It's hard to sit back and bet on anything else than the Cowboys choking. We'll find out. We'll find out. But from that standpoint, who would I sit back and say outside of the Niners can stop the Cowboys? Not really anybody in the NFC. There's not a team in the NFC that I would say is good enough outside of the Niners. The only team that I would argue I think has a really good chance of beating the Cowboys is not the Eagles. It's the Rams. The Rams have a good football team. Offensively, the Rams can match up well against the Niners because their wide receivers are not. That's the difference with the Eagles. The Eagles, A.J. Brown, he's an do-it-all receiver. But from the standpoint of where does A.J. Brown really match up, he's sort of like Dez Bryant. He's really good on these one-on-one matchups. He wins those matchups. But in terms of, crossing routes and really getting the mesh points and all that stuff, the Eagles are not that football team. I think that Devontae Smith does a really good job of it. But in terms of Julio being that guy or Zacchaeus, those type of guys, they don't have it, especially in the red zone. It really shows up in the red zone that the Eagles just can't get that offensive type of production. The Rams, on the other hand, that's their team. Their team can stretch the field, and they have Puka, Nacua, and Cooper Kupp to stretch the field. But at the same time, both of those guys underneath, good luck tackling those dudes. Those are some of the Cooper is one of the best wide receivers in NFL history at doing that in underneath routes. And Puka Nacua is right there with him in terms of how well he plays. The Rams, to me, are the biggest threat to the Cowboys outside of the Niners and the NFC. That's my hot take. I still stand on what I said a few weeks ago that I really do think the Eagles lose in the first round of the playoffs. That's where I see it going for the Eagles. I think the Eagles get knocked out of the playoff first round because they're just not playing consistent football on the defensive side in terms of defensive line, and then they can't stretch the field vertically with their wide receivers. That's what's happened with the Eagles. Then the 2 Monday night games, which the Monday night games are just comebacks. Both of them for the losers were awful. And for the winners, it really doesn't change anything. Neither one of the winners are going to the playoffs. Titans aren't going to the playoffs. Giants aren't going to the playoffs. It's all a matter of how many games are you going to cost yourself going down the stretch in terms of draft compensation. It's sort of like the Texans last year. They really got fortunate in terms of C.J. Stroud was sitting right there, and it didn't cost them because the Panthers took Young, that they got the quarterback of their future. But from the standpoint of both of these franchises, Titans, Giants, they need a high draft pick. They need help. There's a lot of problems on both sides of the football for both of those teams. But they found ways to beat teams that are playing good right now. For the Dolphins was the biggest upset. To be up 14 with 3 minutes to go in the football game and then let the Titans of all teams drive down and score 2 touchdowns, and then you have an offense that couldn't stay on the field when you need it to just win the football game. That is the Dolphins right now. The Dolphins are not a good football team. They've beat up on really bad football teams. And then last night, as a 13-point favorite, up 14 points with 3 minutes to go in the game, you couldn't put away the Titans. Like, the Dolphins are the exact same team the Eagles are. Like, they are a team that's going to get knocked out in the first game they play in the playoffs. Like, they're not a good football team. When Tyreek Hill left that game, completely different football team. Had the inability to stretch the field downfield. And then offensive line didn't look good. And Tua, at the end of the day, Tua made really bad decisions. There's no way to sugarcoat that. Like, he holds on to the football too long. Like, you have too much talent on the offensive side of the football to not get rid of it a little bit sooner. From a decision-making process, Tua didn't have it last night. And it showed up multiple times during that game. They did not play well, especially in the fourth quarter. And that was, I know for Dolphins fans out there, you had to just be sitting back screaming at the TV as you have every year. Like, for as good as they are, they play some of their worst football against terrible opponents. And the Titans are terrible. There's no way to not highlight that. And the fact that they lost really puts them into a position going forward that for the Dolphins, there's not a lot of bright future going into the playoffs because they're a playoff team. They have the wins in the win column to validate that. But from the standpoint of who the Dolphins could be, they're not that. Like, they're just not the team that put up 70 points against the Broncos. They're not a good football team. And on the opposite side, Packers-Giants. The Packers go down and score. And you sit back and I looked at the clock and it's under 2 minutes and you're like, hey, you got DeVito back there that here's a guy that is a rookie that you should have, the ability to affect the game and win from a defensive perspective. And what do? Prevent. And they let them go right down the field. Like, I hate the prevent defense. If you run a prevent defense, you shouldn't be a defensive head coach in the NFL. Plain and simple. If you have such no faith in your guys that it's like, hey, I don't trust you to win your one-on-one matchup, so I'm just going to allow them to complete passes over the middle for short gains, and then maybe you get burnt still because we're in this prevent mode. Do something else for a career. Because the Packers had the game won, and you let the Giants drive right down the field and score because you were unwilling to play defense. You tried to just run out the clock and give them some throws and make tackles in the playing field. Couldn't get it done and cost you the game. Packers had the game won, gave it away to the Giants. From a defensive perspective of both the Dolphins and the Packers, horrendous play calling by your defensive coordinators. The fact that DeVito and Levis were able to win those football games for their teams, and that's not really a shot at Levis or DeVito. It's the fact that both of those defenses should have made these quarterbacks, rookie quarterbacks who are backups going into the year, look terrible. Like, this is the time that a defensive coordinator should be making his money. Like, this is why you get paid. You couldn't make it happen. A horrific coaching job by both of these squads on Monday Night Football. For the Dolphins, do I think it has an impact going forward? 100% with the playoffs. For the Packers, you're playing to try to get into the playoffs. Like, the Packers have played a lot better. They're sort of like the Broncos. Like, both teams started off the year not looking great, and then the Packers have slowly but surely built up, beating the Lions on Thanksgiving, but then you lose to the Giants. Like, you can't sit back and do that type of stuff and be a playoff team. Like, this is not what playoff caliber teams do, and the Packers are on the fringe of making the playoffs, and they probably shouldn't. Like, when you can't, find a way to win the game with less than 2 minutes up, and you let a team drive right down and get a field goal, you deserve to lose a football game, and you don't deserve to make the playoffs. That's the thing for the Packers. Like, and that's what it is going forward. When you take a look at the playoffs, like, ultimately, where's the playoffs leading to? It's leading to a Super Bowl rematch of a few years ago of the Niners-Ravens. If I had to give a prediction right now, that's who my two teams are. And who do I think wins? I think it's the Niners. Niners have too much talent on both sides of the football. Now, I will tell you that the Ravens are the team that can beat the Niners. Why? Lamar Jackson. Like, Lamar Jackson it's one of these guys that I wish Maul was here. I'll probably bring it up next time he's on because I know he's not going to watch the end of this episode. Lamar to me is elite. He's an elite quarterback. I know that debate has been made a lot, but from the standpoint of what he is able to do as a total package of a quarterback, like, he is one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And I think he gets slept on a lot because, yes, he's not got the throws that you see Mahomes or Herbert make every once in a while. Does he make those throws? Absolutely. Lamar has grown from his time as a rookie year to now as a passer. Like, he's really shown that. Like, and he scrambles to keep plays alive. And the fact that now he has Zay Flowers, like, the reason that Lamar has gotten slept on in terms of being an elite quarterback is because he really didn't have the talent around him on the offensive side of the football that you would have liked to have seen. He has the talent that he had was the same that the Chiefs have right now. Like, he had Andrews, Mahomes has Kelsey, but outside of that, like, not a lot of talent. Look at the Chiefs, like, the struggles. If the Chiefs had played like they are right now throughout the first few years of Mahomes, like, would we be talking about Mahomes being one of the greatest ever? I don't think so. Like, to play the position of quarterback, this is the exact same thing with Lamar. Now that you're getting, like, really good talent around him, like, Lamar is showing exactly what he's capable of being, which is the best one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Like, that is who Lamar is, and I think that if anyone can challenge that San Francisco defense with his ability to keep plays alive, now that they have some really good wide receivers around him, like, the Ravens are a huge threat to the Niners. Who would I give, if I had to put money on it, where am I going? It's the Niners. Like, the Niners offense is the difference. Like, Trent Williams, Christian McCaffrey, Brandon Ayuk, and Deebo Samuel, and Kittle. Like, that's a stacked roster. Stacked. Like, they have a very good football team on both sides of the football. It's San Francisco's to lose right now. But we'll see going forward. I know it's a little bit longer of an episode. Do really appreciate you guys for tuning in. Each and every week we've seen more views. We appreciate you guys watching, sharing, do whatever you need to help us out. The biggest thing that you can do to help us out, follow and subscribe our videos. We do appreciate it, both on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. We'll try to keep all the stuff coming as we have been. Look forward to getting Maul back in a few weeks and having him. We'll give a playoff breakdown for not just the NFL, but also for college bowl games and the CFP. For the NFL, we'll really start to get more and more refined on the playoffs, talk about the teams, sort of where we think they're going. Especially we'll get going into the offseason into the NFL, what you can expect is we'll do a big push for the draft. Each and every week, we're going to produce an episode that sort of highlights at least some NFL and college in the offseason. It's football year round. That's our whole goal of this podcast. It's not just during the season, but during the off season, we'll talk about football. So we appreciate you guys tuning in. But that sort of wraps up our episode for this week. So thanks for tuning in. Time to pull chalks. We'll see you next time.